The prenup felt cold against her fingertips, the heavy cream paper a stark contrast to the fire of desperation burning in her gut. Natalie Bloom stared at her reflection in the polished mahogany of the lawyer's desk, her face a mask of serene adoration. Inside, she was a coiled spring of anxiety. The man beside her, her fiancé of 3 weeks, Christian Vale, signed his name with a fluid, confident stroke. He slid the document over to her, his smile gentle, his ISA warm, intelligent shade of whiskey holding hers. She was about to sign away her life for 1 year, for a payout that would save her sister. She picked up the pen, her hand steady, but as she looked at his trusting face, a single, treacherous thought pierced through her carefully constructed defenses. What if he found out? What if he discovered her entire life was a lie, and the woman he thought he loved was nothing more than a beautiful, hollow shell, hungry for his fortune? And what would he do when he realized she had not only broken his trust, but was starting to break her own heart? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Love was a luxury Natalie Bloom had learned early on she couldn't afford. It was a fragile, fleeting thing, a currency for the hopeful and the naive. In her world, love meant watching her father walk out, leaving her mother to crumble under the weight of debt and despair. It meant growing up too fast, becoming the parent to her own younger sister, Lily. Her life had been a series of sacrifices, a constant, grinding battle against a tide of misfortune that always threatened to pull them under. Desperation, not love, was the emotion she understood. And desperation was what had led her here, to this audacious, terrifying plan. Lily was the sun in her bleak sky, a beacon of light and laughter. But that light was dimming. A rare, aggressive autoimmune disease was stealing her sister's future, and the only hope was a new, wildly expensive experimental treatment program in Switzerland. The cost was astronomical, a figure so large it was laughable. It was the kind of money that existed only in headlines and whispered rumors, the kind of money held by men like Christian Vale. Christian Vale was a ghost in the world of the ultra-rich. A tech prodigy who had built his empire, Vale Industries, on revolutionary AI software, he was notoriously private. While other billionaires flaunted their yachts and their ego, Christian funded medical research and built libraries. He was, by all accounts, brilliant, reclusive, and profoundly kind. He was, in Natalie's calculated assessment, the perfect target. The plan was a masterpiece of social engineering. Natalie spent 6 months meticulously researching him, learning his habits, his few public appearances, his philanthropic interests. She transformed herself. With the last of her savings and a small loan she couldn't afford, she curated a new identity. Natalie Bloom, the cynical, hardened survivor, was buried deep beneath Natalia Petrova, an art historian with a quiet grace, a tragic and entirely fabricated backstory of losing her family, and a passion for Renaissance literature, one of Christian's few known interests. Their chance meeting was orchestrated at a charity auction for a rare book collection. She wore a simple, elegant dress in a deep sapphire blue she'd read was his favorite color. She didn't throw herself at him. Instead, she stood alone, observing a dusty folio with an expression of intense, scholarly concentration. He had approached her, intrigued by the woman who seemed more interested in the 16th century manuscript than the champagne and caviar. Their courtship was a whirlwind, precisely as she had planned. She played her part to perfection. She was intelligent but unassuming, appreciative of his world, but not dazzled by it. She listened more than she spoke, her large, expressive eyes conveying a depth of emotion she did not feel. She was a mirror, reflecting back the man he wanted her to be. When he proposed after just 2 months on a private trip to Florence, surrounded by the art she pretended to adore, A part of her was shocked at how easily her deception had worked. The other part felt a cold, sharp pang of something she refused to name: guilt. Now, sitting in the sterile office of his lawyer, the prenup was the final hurdle. It was her golden ticket. The terms were more than generous: a lump sum of $10 million upon the dissolution of the marriage, provided it lasted for a minimum of 1 year. $10 million. Enough to save Lily, to give her a future, to finally let Natalie breathe. She signed her name, Natalia Petrova, her practiced script, a final damning lie. "I know this is all rather cold and clinical," Christian said softly as they left the lawyer's skyscraper office, his hand resting on the small of her back. "It's just a precaution, a necessity of my world." "I understand," she said, forcing a gentle smile. "It's just paper." But it wasn't. It was a contract, a countdown clock. 365 days. All she had to do was play the loving wife, keep her heart locked away, and then walk away with the money. It should have been easy. But as Christian hailed a cab, opening the door for her and giving her a smile so genuine it physically hurt to look at, she felt the first terrifying crack in her icy resolve. She was marrying a man for his money, but she hadn't accounted for the man himself. Christian Vale's penthouse was not a home, it was a statement. Occupying the top 3 floors of a sleek, obsidian tower that pierced the city skyline, it was a marvel of minimalist design. Walls of glass offered breathtaking, panoramic views, making the sprawling city below look like a diamond-dusted carpet. The furniture was sparse and sculptural, the art on the walls abstract and challenging. It was beautiful, sterile, and as vast and empty as a museum after hours. Natalie, or rather Natalia, found it profoundly lonely. She had imagined her new life would be a whirl of social events, lavish parties, and endless shopping sprees, the perfect cover to pass the year. But Christian's life was not one of idle decadence. He was disciplined and focused, rising at dawn for a run before disappearing into his home office for hours on end, emerging only for quiet, simple meals. The staff, a small, impeccably professional team led by a stern housekeeper named Mrs. Gable, moved with silent efficiency. They were polite, but their eyes were observant, their presence a constant reminder that she was an outsider, an addition to the household who had not yet been fully assessed. Her gilded cage came with a black credit card with no limit, a key to a garage filled with cars she didn't know how to drive, and a closet the size of her old apartment filled with clothes chosen by a stylist. She had everything she had ever dreamed of, and she had never felt more hollow. The money, the tangible goal of her mission, was suddenly abstract. The reality was this echoing silence, this feeling of being an imposter in a life that was not her own. The true complication, however, was Christian. He wasn't the absent-minded, easily fooled academic she had banked on. He was quietly, intensely perceptive. He would emerge from his office in the afternoons and find her curled up in the vast library, a book open on her lap, and he would ask her questions. Not intrusive questions, but thoughtful ones, about her interpretation of a passage, her opinion on an artist's technique. She would scramble for an answer, pulling from the CliffsNotes version of a life she had invented, her heart pounding with the fear of being exposed. Worse than the questions were his gestures of kindness. They were small, unexpected, and devastatingly personal. He noticed she chewed on her lip when she was anxious, a habit she thought she had conquered. One evening, he handed her a small, smooth worry stone. "A friend gave this to me when I was fundraising for my first startup," he said, his thumb brushing hers as he placed it in her palm. It helped. Another time, after she'd made a passing, fabricated comment about missing the scent of jasmine from her childhood home in the Mediterranean, she woke up to find a rare, potted jasmine plant on her bedside table. its delicate white blossoms filling the room with a fragrance that smelled like her own guilt. Each act of thoughtfulness was a small, sharp pinprick to her conscience. He wasn't just a mark, he was a good man, a profoundly decent man who was giving her his trust, his time, and pieces of his heart. And she was systematically betraying him with every breath she took. The first major crack in her emotional armor came during a visit to the city's pediatric oncology ward, the wing that Vale Industries had funded entirely. It wasn't a press event. He went unannounced, without cameras or fanfare. Natalie had accompanied him, playing the part of the supportive fiancé. She watched as he sat on the floor with a little girl who had lost her hair to chemotherapy, patiently helping her assemble a complex Lego castle. There was no artifice in him, no performance. He spoke to the child with a gentle respect, his focus entirely on her. Later, she overheard him speaking quietly with the head of the department, not just committing to more funding, but asking detailed, intelligent questions about a new research trial, understanding the science in a way that left the doctor visibly impressed. Standing in the hallway, the smell of antiseptic sharp in her nostrils, Natalie was hit by a wave of self-loathing so intense it made her dizzy. She was there to steal from this man, to use his wealth to solve her own problems. And he was here, quietly and selflessly, trying to solve the problems of the world. She saw Lily's face in the faces of the sick children, and the carefully constructed walls between her mission and her morality came crashing down. She wasn't a noble anti-hero on a righteous quest. She was a thief, and she was stealing from one of the few genuinely good people she had ever met. Her unease did not go unnoticed. Christian's head of security, Ben Carter, was a former Special Forces operative with eyes that missed nothing. He was fiercely loyal to Christian, his best and perhaps only true friend. From the moment Natalie had entered Christian's life, Ben had watched her with a quiet, unnerving suspicion. He was a shadow at the edge of her new life, his presence a constant, low-level threat. "He's a trusting man," Ben said to her one afternoon, finding her alone on one of the penthouse's many terraces. His voice was low and even, devoid of any obvious emotion, which made it all the more menacing. Some might say too trusting. "He sees the best in people, even when it's not there." "Christian is a good judge of character," Natalie replied, her voice cooler than she felt. Ben took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "Character can be fabricated. A good story, a pretty face, it can hide a lot. But the truth has a way of coming out. It always does." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Ben was watching her, waiting for her to slip up. And as the days turned into weeks, and the one-year mark loomed closer, Natalie found herself trapped in a terrifying paradox. Her plan was working perfectly, and it was destroying her. She was getting everything she wanted, only to realize that the one thing she was now starting to crave, the genuine affection of her husband, was the one thing she could never, ever have. Because you couldn't earn a man's heart when your entire relationship was built on a lie. The pressure began to mount in unbearable increments. Every phone call from the clinic in Switzerland was a fresh wave of anxiety. Lily's condition was stable, but the doctors were clear. The window for the experimental treatment was closing. They needed to begin within the next few months. This reality gnawed at Natalie, making her more and more reckless. The cool, calculated Natalia began to fray at the edges, revealing the desperate, frightened Natalie underneath. She started making mistakes. She took hushed, frantic phone calls in Russian her, one genuine skill, inherited from her grandmother, forgetting the penthouse was likely equipped with security measures that could pick up anything. She made large cash withdrawals, clumsily trying to wire money to the clinic through a series of complicated channels, leaving a digital trail a man like Ben Carter could likely trace in his sleep. Ben's surveillance became more overt. He would appear when she was on the phone, his presence forcing her to end the call abruptly. He'd make casual remarks about the complexities of international wire transfers. He was baiting her, letting her know the net was closing. Christian, too, seemed to change. The easy warmth in his eyes was often replaced by a flicker of something she couldn't quite read: confusion, disappointment, hurt. The thoughtful questions about art and literature ceased, replaced by a heavy, uncomfortable silence that stretched for hours. He was pulling away, retreating back into the shell of the reclusive billionaire she had first read about. The kindness that had so unnerved her was gone, and its absence was 1,000 times more painful. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday evening. It was raining outside, the water streaming down the floor-to-ceiling windows and blurring the city lights into a watercolor wash. Natalie had just finished a call with Lily's doctor. The news was not good. A sudden complication meant the treatment needed to be moved up, the first payment made within the week. She was hanging up, her heart pounding in her chest, when she turned to find Christian standing in the doorway of the library. He wasn't angry. He was terrifyingly calm. In his hand, he held a thin file. Ben stood silently behind him, his expression grim. "I was hoping I was wrong," Christian said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of a death sentence. "I kept telling myself there was a reasonable explanation." He opened the file. It was a complete dossier on her. Not Natalia Petrova, but Natalie Bloom. Her real birth certificate, her mother's medical debts, her sister's complete medical history, bank statements showing the loan she'd taken to fund her transformation. It was all there, every ugly, desperate truth. "Ben is very thorough," Christian continued, his gaze never leaving hers. "He was suspicious from day one. I told him he was being paranoid." He looked down at the file, then back at her, and she finally saw the emotion in his eyes. It was a profound, soul-deep betrayal. "Who were you?" The question shattered the last of her composure. The lies, the carefully constructed persona, the weight of the past year, all came crashing down. Tears streamed down her face, hot and shameful. My name is Natalie," she choked out, the name feeling foreign on her tongue. "And the rest?" he prompted, his voice devoid of pity. "Was any of it real? The books? The art? The way you smiled when I told you about my parents?" "No," she whispered, the admission tearing her apart. It was all a lie. She sank to the floor, her body racked with sobs. This was it. The end of the game. He would throw her out, call the police, ruin her. And he would be right to do so. But in that moment of complete and utter ruin, a strange clarity pierced through her panic. She had nothing left to lose. The only thing she could offer him now was the truth. Pulling herself together, she stood up and faced him, her eyes red and swollen, but her gaze direct for the first time. "It was all a lie," she repeated, her voice stronger now. "But the reason for it is real." For the next hour, the whole story poured out of her. She told him about Lily, about their childhood, about the crushing weight of the medical bills and the terror of watching her sister fade away. She explained the cold, desperate calculus that had led her to him. She spared no detail of her deception, her manipulation, her guilt. She laid her soul bare, expecting him to recoil in disgust. She finished by sliding her phone across the table, showing him a picture of a smiling, vibrant Lily before her illness, and then another, of her pale and frail in a hospital bed. When she was done, the silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of the rain against the glass. Christian stood motionless, his face an unreadable mask. He hadn't looked at the photos. Ben had already retreated, leaving them alone. "I see," Christian said finally. He walked over to the window, his back to her. "So the last year, our marriage, it was all just a means to an end, a business transaction." "At first, yes," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "But then "Then what?" he asked, turning around, his eyes flashing with a sudden, cold anger. "You grew a conscience? You started to feel guilty about bleeding the kind-hearted fool dry?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "I fell in love with you." The confession hung in the air, raw and unbelievable. Christian let out a short, bitter laugh. "Love. You wouldn't know the first thing about it. You just told me your entire life with me has been a performance." "I know," she said, fresh tears welling. "I know you will never believe me, and you have no reason to. But it's the truth. I came for your money. But I saw who you are, Christian. I saw your kindness, your goodness, and I fell in love with the man I was supposed to be. Deceiving." He stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. The anger in his eyes faded, replaced by a profound weariness. His trust, once given so freely, was shattered into a million pieces. "I need you to leave," he said, his voice flat and final. "Christian, please, not from the penthouse," he clarified, cutting her off. "Just from this room. I need to think." He turned back to the window, a solitary figure against the backdrop of the stormy city. Natalie stood frozen, her heart aching with a pain far greater than any desperation she had ever known. She had come for his money, and in the process, she had lost her own soul. He hadn't thrown her out. He hadn't called the police. He had done something far worse. He had shut her out completely, leaving her alone in their beautiful, empty home, a prisoner in the gilded cage she had so carefully built for herself. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that while she might still get the money to save her sister, she had irrevocably lost the one thing she now realized she couldn't live without: him. The penthouse, once a symbol of her imminent victory, became a luxurious prison. The silence was no longer just empty, it was accusatory. Every beautiful object, every piece of art, seemed to mock her. The scent of the jasmine plant by her bed was a constant, fragrant reminder of her betrayal. Christian was a ghost in his own home. He moved through the rooms without seeing her, his presence a cold front that left a chill in its wake. They existed in separate orbits, two planets that had been knocked out of alignment, close enough to feel each other's gravity but never touching. The $10 million from the prenup was meaningless now, a hollow prize. Her desperation for the money had been eclipsed by a desperate, aching need for his forgiveness. With horrifying clarity, Natalie understood the cruel irony of her situation. She had set out to steal a fortune and had ended up losing herself. She had never believed in love, and now it was the only thing she wanted, the one thing she had methodically destroyed any chance of having. The first step towards redemption was a small, painful one. She gathered all the jewelry Christian had bought her, the diamond earrings, the sapphire necklace that matched her dress from their first meeting, the delicate Cartier watch, and took them to a private dealer. The sum she received was substantial, a fraction of their worth, but enough. She wired every last cent to the clinic in Switzerland, an anonymous donation towards Lily's treatment fund. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. It was her money, earned from the sale of her lies. Her next step was to dismantle Natalia Petrova for good. She packed away the designer clothes, the symbols of her deception, and unearthed the simple, practical things she had arrived with. She needed to prove, to herself as much as to him, that she was not the helpless creature from her sob story. Tucked away in her resume of lies was a kernel of truth. She was fluent in Russian. Armed with this one genuine skill, she found a low-level job as a translator for a small import-export firm. The work was tedious, the pay a pittance compared to the allowance she'd been given, but it was hers. It was real. Her days took on a new, humbling rhythm. She would leave the silent penthouse early in the morning, take the subway to her drab office, and return in the evening to the same crushing silence. One day, on impulse, She went to the pediatric oncology ward at the city hospital, the one he had funded. She didn't announce herself. She simply signed up to be a volunteer. She spent her weekends reading to children, helping them with puzzles, offering a quiet presence to weary parents. She did it because she needed to be closer to the goodness she had seen in him, to try and absorb some of it into her own tarnished soul. Meanwhile, Christian was on his own journey. The initial, white-hot anger had cooled into a landscape of wounded confusion. Ben had urged him to throw her out, to pursue legal action for fraud. But Christian couldn't. He had reread the file on her 100 times. He saw the desperation, the history of pain and sacrifice that had forged her into the cynic she was. He investigated her story himself, using his considerable resources to verify every detail. He confirmed Lily's diagnosis, the astronomical cost of the treatment, the fact that Natalie had been her sister's sole guardian and provider since she was 19. From a distance, he watched her. His security team tracked her movements. He knew about the sale of the jewelry. He knew about the translation job. He received a quiet, informal report from the head of the hospital, mentioning a new, wonderfully dedicated volunteer named Natalie who had a special gift with the children. He saw a woman not just playing a part, but actively trying to atone. The woman he had fallen in love with, the quiet strength, the fierce intelligence he'd sensed beneath the surface hadn't been a fabrication. She had just been buried under a lifetime of pain. His heart was a war zone. The hurt was still there, a raw, open wound. But admiration was starting to grow in its place, a grudging respect for her resilience, for her determination to claw her way back to integrity. One afternoon, Natalie received a call from the clinic. They were effusive, overjoyed. An anonymous benefactor had contacted them, a foundation based in Geneva. They had reviewed Lily's case and had agreed to cover the entire cost of the treatment program, including travel and aftercare. The first transfer of funds had already been completed. Natalie sank into her chair, the phone slipping from her numb fingers. There was only one person in the world who could have done this. It wasn't a grand gesture of forgiveness. It was a quiet act of grace. It was Christian, telling her, in his own way, that he saw her. He had separated the woman from her desperate act. He had saved her sister, and in doing so, had given her a piece of her soul back. A week later, he came to her. She was in the library, the one room that still felt like a sanctuary, staring out at the city lights. She heard his footsteps and turned, her heart lodging in her throat. The cold distance was gone from his eyes, replaced by something new, something cautious and fragile. "The hospital called me," he said, his voice quiet. "Lily's treatment begins next week. You should go to Switzerland with her." "Christian," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you." There are no words." "Don't thank me," he said, taking a step closer. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for your sister. And for the man I want to be." He stalked a few feet from her. "What you did was wrong, Natalie. It shattered my trust in a way I didn't think was possible." "I know," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "But I also understand why you did it." He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time in weeks. He saw the change in her, the exhaustion, the humility, the quiet strength. "The prenuptial agreement is void. The marriage, as we knew it, is over." Her heart plummeted. This was it. He was finally letting her go. "But," he continued, and her head snapped up, "I find myself unwilling to let you walk away." He gave a small, wry smile. "It seems my heart is less rational than my brain. I fell in love with a ghost, Natalie, but I think I'm starting to see the real woman, and I'd like to get to know her, if she's willing." He was offering her a second chance. Not a pardon, but a path. A new beginning, built not on lies, but on a foundation of brutal, painful honesty. "I won't just give you my trust," he said, his voice firm. "You'll have to earn it. Every day. And I will have to learn how to be vulnerable enough to accept it." She took a hesitant step toward him, then another, until she was standing before him. She didn't touch him. The space between them was sacred, filled with the potential of what they could build. "I will spend the rest of my life earning it," she promised, her voice clear and certain. "If you'll let me." He nodded slowly, a flicker of the old warmth returning to his whiskey-colored eyes. The journey ahead would be long and difficult. Trust, once shattered, had to be rebuilt piece by piece. But as she stood before him, no longer Natalia the imposter, but Natalie the survivor, she knew she had already won the only thing that mattered. She had come for his money, a prize she no longer wanted. Instead, through the fire of her own making, she had finally, painstakingly, begun to earn his heart.